Don't you dare touch that tray. The cafeteria manager snatched the plastic tray from the girl's hands so fast the silverware clattered against the steel counter. She peeled off her latex gloves and wiped her palms on her apron like she just handled something contaminated. You black people sneaking into the wrong places like hungry black rats every day. She stepped closer. Her voice didn't drop. It rose. She wanted witnesses. Section B. That's where people like you eat. Not here. The girl held up her student ID card. Her hand didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. She'd done this before. Ma'am, I've already paid my tuition. With what? The woman's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. More like the expression a cat makes before it finishes what's left of a mouse. People like you can't make money. Now get out of my line before you contaminate every plate of food in this cafeteria. The girl said nothing. She stood perfectly still, holding her empty tray with both hands, while a grown woman in a hairnet looked at her the way someone looks at a stain on their shirt. Behind her, 40 students in the lunch line stared. Some looked away. Some pulled out their phones. One boy near the front, tall black, wearing a Whitmore track hoodie, took a half step forward like he wanted to help. The girl shook her head at him. A tiny motion. Barely visible. Don't. Behind the counter, 2 kitchen workers stood frozen at their stations. Both Latino. Both staring at the floor. The body language of people who had seen this before and learned a long time ago that speaking up only made things worse. The girl didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't leave. She just stood there in the main serving line of the Whitmore University dining hall on a Tuesday morning in October, holding an empty tray, waiting for something she couldn't name. And then the glass door at the far end of the cafeteria opened, and a man walked in. He was mid-stride heading toward the salad bar, when he heard the word rats. He stopped. Not the way people usually stop, a slow deceleration, a casual pause. He stopped the way a soldier stops. The way someone stops when a sound they've been trained to recognize cuts through the noise of a room. His jaw clenched. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His breathing slowed. Marine Corps training doesn't leave your body. Not after 4 years of service. Not after 2 tours overseas. Not after 23 years of civilian life. Your body remembers how to go quiet when something dangerous enters the room. He scanned the cafeteria. Not in a panicked way. In a systematic way. Left to right. Near to far. Assessing. He saw his daughter. His Amara. Standing in the lunch line with an empty tray. A woman in a cafeteria uniform pointing a gloved finger at her chest. 40 students watching. 3 tables of kids with their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. And something inside the man named Darius Coleman went very, very still. Let me tell you who this man is. Because you need to understand what walked through that door before you understand what happened next. Darius Coleman grew up in East Baltimore. Not the Baltimore they show in travel brochures. Not the harbor with the fancy restaurants and the aquarium. The Baltimore where gunshots replace fireworks on the 4th of July. Where the hallway of his apartment building smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke every single day of his childhood. Where the streetlights flickered out by 10 p.m., and nobody called the city to fix them because nobody believed the city would answer. His father, Walter Coleman, mopped floors at Johns Hopkins Hospital for 31 years. Every morning at 5 a.m., Walter put on his gray uniform, kissed his wife on the forehead, and took 2 buses across town to clean the hallways of one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the world. He mopped the floors outside operating rooms where surgeons made in a day what he made in a year. He mopped the floors outside research labs where scientists were curing diseases he couldn't even pronounce. He never complained. Not once. He came home every night with clean hands and tired eyes and told his boys the same thing. Education is the only thing they can't take from you. His mother, Patricia Coleman, no relation to the woman who would one day humiliate his daughter in a university cafeteria, taught 3rd grade at a public school with no air conditioning. She bought classroom supplies out of her own paycheck. She stayed late to tutor kids who had nobody waiting for them at home. She and Walter never made more than $42,000 combined in any single year. But every night, after dinner, Patricia Coleman sat at the kitchen table with Darius and his older brother Elijah, and made them read out loud until the streetlights came on. Not silently. Out loud. So she could hear them stumble over words and correct them. So she could ask them questions about what they just read and make sure they actually understood it. So the sound of two black boys reading books filled their apartment the way music fills a church. Elijah was the smart one. Everyone said so. He wanted to be a doctor. Not just any doctor, a pediatric oncologist. He'd seen a documentary about childhood cancer when he was 9 and hadn't stopped talking about it since. He had the grades. A straight A student from kindergarten through 6th grade. He had the mind. He could memorize a page after reading it twice. He built a model of a human cell out of clay for the school science fair and won first place. He didn't have the time. Elijah was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia at 11 years old. The doctors at Johns Hopkins, the same hospital where his father mopped floors, caught it late. Too late. The cancer had already spread to his lymph nodes by the time the first symptoms showed up. He died on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 12. Darius was 9 years old. He remembers standing in the hospital hallway, staring down at the same linoleum floor his father mopped every morning, and thinking one thought on a loop like a broken record. Why didn't anyone catch it sooner? That question never left him. Not when he was 12. Not when he was 18. Not when he was 48 years old, standing in a university cafeteria, watching a woman call his daughter a rat. It was still there. Still looping. Still driving everything he did. At 18, Darius enlisted in the Marine Corps. Not because he wanted to fight. Because he wanted to pay for college without burying his parents in debt. 4 years of service. 2 tours overseas. A scar on his left shoulder from shrapnel he never talks about and his daughter has only seen twice. Then MIT on the GI Bill. Biochemistry. Top of his class. His professors said he had a gift for seeing patterns in molecular structures that other students missed. He told them it wasn't a gift. It was a dead brother's voice in the back of his head, asking why nobody caught it sooner. After MIT, a garage lab in Stamford, Connecticut, a folding table, a used centrifuge he bought off eBay for $800, a hot plate, 3 beakers, and one obsession that consumed every waking hour. Pediatric cancer therapeutics. The kind of medicine that could have saved Elijah. That garage became Coleman Bioventures. Today it sits on the NASDAQ exchange. For $0.2 billion market cap. 312 employees. 14 drugs in clinical trials. 6 already saving children's lives in 22 countries. Darius Coleman built all of it with his hands, his mind, and a dead brother's name carved into his heart. The company's logo, a small blue star with 2 points slightly longer than the others, is a shape Elijah used to draw in the margins of his notebooks. Darius never told the board that. He never told the press. He just put it on every document, every lab coat, every building sign, and let it mean what it meant to him. 2 years ago, his wife Renee collapsed in their Brooklyn kitchen. Brain aneurysm. No warning. No symptoms. She was grading student essays at the kitchen island. She taught English literature at Columbia, when the blood vessel in her brain simply gave way. She was 39 years old. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. After the funeral, Darius couldn't cook in that kitchen anymore. He couldn't look at the chair where she used to sit with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, marking papers with a red pen and humming songs from her childhood. He couldn't sleep in their bed. He couldn't walk past her coat still hanging by the front door. So he moved. He sold the brownstone. He packed what mattered into boxes and drove Amara to Connecticut, closer to the company, closer to work, closer to anything that wasn't the kitchen where Renee died. Amara was 16 then. She didn't complain. She didn't cry in front of him. She held his hand at the funeral and whispered 4 words that he still hears every night before he falls asleep. "I got you, Daddy." That girl, his girl, was the same girl standing in a university lunch line 2 years later, holding an empty tray, being told she didn't belong. Amara had been accepted into Whitmore University on pure merit. SAT score in the top 2% nationally. A research paper on gene therapy published in a peer-reviewed journal before she graduated high school. Recommendations from 3 professors who called her the most promising young scientist they'd encountered in a decade. She earned her place. Every inch of it. But she also carried a secret she never told anyone on campus. Her father was one of the university's largest donors. The Renee Coleman Foundation had been in talks with the Whitmore Board of Trustees for months about a $12.5 million endowment, a brand new biochemistry research center named after her mother. Architectural renderings had been approved. Groundbreaking was scheduled for the spring. Amara knew all of this, and she chose to say nothing. Not to her roommate Sophie, not to her friend Tyler, not to her professors, not to anyone. She wanted to prove she belonged on her own. No last name, no foundation, no billion-dollar safety net. Just her brain, her work, and her mother's voice in her head saying education is the only thing they can't take from you. So she kept quiet. Even when Patricia Sullivan started targeting her in the cafeteria during the first week of classes. Even when it happened again the second week. And the third. And every week after that. Even when Patricia began calling it Section B. And pointing black and brown students toward a separate serving line that didn't exist in any official university policy. Amara never told her father. Not because she wasn't hurt. Not because she wasn't angry. But because she didn't want him to think she was weak. Because she thought if she reported it, people would say the billionaire's daughter was being dramatic. Because she believed, the way so many young people believe, that if she just kept her head down and worked hard enough, the cruelty would eventually stop on its own. It didn't. Research from the University of Massachusetts found something that Amara was learning the hard way. Microaggressions, the small, daily slights, the sideways comments, the you people and the go over there, and the you don't belong here, cause measurable psychological harm equivalent to major traumatic events when experienced repeatedly over time. The damage isn't in any single incident. It's in the accumulation. The drip. The slow, invisible erosion of a person's belief that the world will ever be fair. Amara had been absorbing that drip every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 months. Alone. This particular Tuesday morning, Darius had flown in from New York at 6 a.m. His helicopter landed at Whitmore's private airfield at 7:15. By 8, he was sitting in the mahogany-paneled boardroom on the 3rd floor of the administration building, shaking hands with the Board of Trustees. The morning session went well. Financial projections approved. Architectural renderings praised. The endowment was nearly finalized. Everyone smiled. Everyone shook hands. Everyone called him Mr. Coleman, with the exact right amount of respect and deference. At noon, the board broke for lunch. The trustees headed for the faculty dining room. White tablecloths, sparkling water, salmon fillets, the works. Darius declined. He told the board chair he needed some air. But the truth was simpler than that. He hadn't seen his daughter in 3 weeks. He missed her. He wanted to surprise her. Sit across from her in the cafeteria like a normal dad. Eat whatever mystery meat they were serving. Ask about her classes. Hear her laugh. He didn't call ahead. He didn't text. He just walked down 2 flights of stairs, followed the signs to the university dining hall, pushed open the glass door, and heard a woman call his daughter a black rat. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in a room you earned your place in, type, I know this feeling in the comments right now. You're not alone. And what happens next in this cafeteria is going to make sure nobody at Whitmore ever feels that way again. But first, Darius has to cross the room. And the way he does it, quiet, controlled, deliberate, is about to change everything. Darius crossed the cafeteria in 12 steps. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum. That wasn't intentional. It was muscle memory. Marine Corps training teaches you to move through space without announcing your presence. You learn to control your breath. You learn to keep your hands visible. You learn that the most dangerous man in any room is never the loudest one. He didn't look at the students filming with their phones. He didn't look at the kitchen workers frozen at their stations. He didn't look at the 40 people in the lunch line who were watching him the way spectators watch a tennis match they didn't pay to attend. He looked at Amara. She was standing exactly where he'd seen her from the doorway. Empty tray in both hands. Shoulders straight. Face composed. The same composure she'd used at her mother's funeral. The kind that doesn't mean you're okay. It means you've decided the world doesn't get to see you break. He stopped 3 feet from the counter. He placed his right hand on Amara's shoulder. Gently. The way you touch someone to let them know they're not alone anymore. Amara flinched. Then she turned. Her eyes went wide. The composure cracked just barely. Just enough for Darius to see what was underneath it. Not fear. Not anger. Shame. The specific suffocating shame of being caught in a moment you've been hiding from the one person you love most. Dad. Her voice cracked on the word. The same crack he'd heard 2 years ago at the kitchen table when she read her first research paper out loud. But this time it wasn't nerves about a presentation. It was the sound of a secret collapsing. What are you doing here? Darius didn't answer. Not yet. He squeezed her shoulder once. A small wordless message that said, I'm here, I see you, will handle this together. And then he turned to face the woman behind the counter. Patricia Sullivan was still standing there. Latex gloves peeled off and balled in one fist. Apron streaked with something that might have been gravy. Her chin was tilted up in a posture that Darius recognized immediately. The posture of someone who has spent years being the most powerful person in a small room, and has forgotten that the world outside that room doesn't work the same way. Excuse me, Darius said. His voice was level. No heat. No volume. The calm, measured tone of a man who has chaired boardrooms with senators and generals on the other side of the table. I'm her father. I'd like to understand what's happening here. This is the moment that mattered. Not the moment Darius walked through the door. Not the moment Patricia called his daughter a rat. This moment. Right here. The 3 seconds after a stranger asked a question in a reasonable voice. Because this is where everything could have gone differently. If Patricia Sullivan had looked at this man and seen a human being, just a father trying to understand why his child was being treated this way, she could have said, I'm sorry, there's been a misunderstanding. She could have handed the tray back. She could have checked the meal plan system. She could have de-escalated the entire situation in 10 seconds. But she didn't. She looked at Darius Coleman the same way she looked at his daughter. The same way she'd looked at every black person who'd crossed her serving line for 19 years. She saw the navy blazer with no tie. She saw no entourage. No security detail. No Rolex flashing on his wrist. No power signal she'd been trained to recognize. She saw a black man. That was enough. Sir. She tilted her chin up another degree. Parents and visitors are not permitted in the serving area. If you have questions about your daughter's financial situation, the financial aid office is in the administration building. 2nd floor. They open at 9. Financial aid. Darius let those 2 words hang in the air between them. He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He just looked at Patricia the way a chess player looks at an opponent who has just made a move they'll regret in 5 turns. I'm not here about finances, he said. I'm here about the way you just spoke to my child. Patricia uncrossed her arms. She placed both hands flat on the stainless steel counter and leaned forward. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed above her like trapped insects. Her voice got louder, deliberately louder. She was performing now. Not for Darius. For the kitchen staff behind her. For the students watching. For anyone who might question her authority later. We have standards here. We have systems. Maybe at the schools you're used to, people can just walk in and demand whatever they want. But this is Whitmore University. She paused. Let the name sit in the air like it meant something sacred. And I have been here for 19 years. So I suggest you lower your voice, collect your daughter, and leave through the side exit. Quietly. Darius didn't lower anything. He didn't raise anything either. He stood exactly where he was, hands at his sides, breathing steady, watching Patricia Sullivan dig herself deeper with every word. I'd like your name and title, please. Patricia blinked. Excuse me. Your name and your title. I'm making a formal inquiry. Her left eye twitched. Just once. The first crack in the mask. I don't have to give you anything. Then I'd like to speak with your supervisor. Patricia laughed. A short, dry sound like a branch snapping under a boot. Honey, I am the supervisor. I run this entire dining operation. Have for 19 years. And in 19 years, I have never had someone walk into my cafeteria and speak to me like this. She leaned even closer. Close enough that Darius could smell the coffee on her breath. Close enough that he could see the tiny veins in her nose, the way her hands trembled slightly, Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of someone who believes they are about to win. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Leave, or I will have you removed. Darius didn't move. I'd like my daughter to receive the hot meal that my family has paid for. Full tuition. Full meal plan. No financial aid. No scholarship. Paid in full. And I'd like it served to her at this counter. The same counter where you serve every other student. Patricia stared at him. Her nostrils flared. Her jaw tightened. The cafeteria was so quiet you could hear the ice machine humming 3 rooms away. Then she reached under the counter and pressed a button. The radio crackled to life. Static popped. And Patricia Sullivan spoke into it with the exaggerated calm of someone who has already decided to make you the villain. Security. This is Sullivan in the dining hall. I have an unidentified male in the serving area. He is confrontational and refuses to leave. I need assistance immediately. She set the radio down. Looked at Darius. Smiled. Let's see how this goes for you. 30 seconds later, the side door swung open and Officer Brenda Hayes walked in. Mid-40s. Campus security uniform. Radio on her hip. She scanned the room fast, the way trained officers do. Amara standing rigid by the counter. Darius with his hands visible at his sides. Patricia behind the counter with her arms crossed, and a look on her face that said finally, someone who'll handle this. Hayes had been campus security for 11 years. She'd responded to noise complaints, dorm lockouts, parking disputes, a few alcohol-related incidents during homecoming. She had never once drawn her taser. She was good at reading rooms, and right now this room didn't read right. But Patricia was already moving toward her, whispering fast, loud enough for Darius to catch pieces. Not a registered parent. Walked right in aggressive behavior. I feel threatened. Might not even be her father. Hayes looked at Darius. Sir, can I see some identification, please? Darius reached into his blazer pocket slowly, deliberately, the way black men in America learn to move around anyone in uniform. Every motion telegraphed, every angle visible, nothing sudden, nothing that could be misinterpreted. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it over without a word. Hayes checked it, radioed it in. The response came back in 15 seconds. Clean. No warrants. No record. Not even a parking ticket. He's clean, Hayes said half to herself. Patricia was already shaking her head. That doesn't mean anything. Anyone can carry an ID. Look at him. Does he look like he belongs here? Hayes paused. Something shifted in her expression. A tiny frown. The beginning of doubt. Not about Darius, but about the woman standing next to her. But Patricia pressed harder. She always pressed harder. I saw him reach across the counter earlier. He could have pocketed something. I want his bag checked. She pointed at the leather briefcase on Darius's shoulder. Open it. Hayes turned to Darius. She looked uncomfortable. Her hand rested on her radio, not her taser. That was a good sign. But her mouth said what Patricia wanted it to say. Sir, would you mind if I took a look in your bag? The cafeteria held its breath. Darius looked at Officer Hayes. Then at Patricia. Then at the dozens of phones already recording from every angle of the room. Red lights blinking on the back of each one. Tiny digital witnesses. No, he said. Each word placed like a brick in a wall. I do not consent to a search. There is no probable cause. No warrant. This is my personal property. Calm. Clear. Each sentence a legal boundary drawn in the air. Hayes nodded. She understood. Legally she could not push it. She knew that. Darius knew that. But Patricia Sullivan did not care about the law. Patricia cared about winning. In 19 years at Whitmore, she had never lost a confrontation with someone who looked like Darius Coleman. She'd built an entire career on the assumption that people like him would back down. Would leave. Would swallow whatever she served them and walk away. She moved fast. She came around the end of the counter and grabbed the leather briefcase right off Darius's shoulder. Hard enough that the strap burned a line across his collarbone. Amara shouted. Do not touch him. Hayes stepped forward. Patricia, wait. Too late. Patricia had the briefcase on the counter. She unzipped it with both hands. The sound ripped through the cafeteria like a scream. She started pulling things out, slamming each item onto the stainless steel surface for the whole room to see. A laptop. Silver. She barely glanced at it. A leather portfolio. Dark brown. Embossed on the front in gold letters. Coleman Bioventures. Patricia did not read it. Did not care. A Marine Corps Challenge coin. Heavy bronze. The kind they give you for service in combat zones. Patricia turned it over like a bottle cap and tossed it back onto the counter. Metal rang against steel. Amara flinched. Tyler flinched. Sophie covered her mouth. A bound document. 53 pages. The title page read, Endowment Agreement, Renee Coleman Biochemistry Research Center, Whitmore University, $12,500,000. Patricia flipped through 3 pages. Didn't read a word. Tossed it back like junk mail. Nothing here, she announced. Loud. Theatrical. But that does not mean I trust him. Then she wiped her hands on her apron. The same gesture from before. As if contact with anything belonging to a black person required decontamination. A 2019 study from Stanford University found that black men in professional settings are routinely perceived as more threatening than their white counterparts, even when displaying identical calm, non-aggressive behavior. Researchers call it threat bias. It's a pattern of perception so deeply embedded in American culture that it operates below conscious awareness. People don't choose to see it. They've been trained to see it by a lifetime of media, messaging, and institutional reinforcement. This is what Patricia was counting on when she called security. This is what she was counting on when she demanded a bag search. This is what she'd been counting on for 19 years. That a black man, no matter how calm, how polite, how reasonable, would always look suspicious to the people watching. She was wrong about that. But she wouldn't know it for another 20 minutes. Darius looked at his challenge coin lying on the counter next to a ketchup dispenser and a stack of paper napkins. That coin had been in his pocket the day Elijah died. The day Amara was born. The day he buried Renee. He'd carried it through 2 combat tours and 12 board meetings and every difficult conversation he'd ever had with a daughter who missed her mother. Now it was sitting next to a Heinz bottle in a university cafeteria, while a woman wiped her hands on her apron like she just touched something dirty. He picked it up, slid it into his blazer pocket. The only thing trembling was his hand. He put that hand behind his back where nobody could see it. He said nothing. But behind him, Tyler Brooks was still filming. Hands shaking. Camera steady. 11 minutes of unbroken footage that would be watched by 40 million people before the week was over. And Patricia Sullivan didn't notice a single phone. She was too busy smiling. If Patricia just crossed a line by searching a man's belongings in front of 300 students without a warrant, hit that like button right now. Because what she does next is even worse. And when Dean Whitmore walks through that elevator door, Patricia's entire world is going to collapse. But that's coming. First, she has one more thing to say to Amara. And it's the word that will end her career. Patricia walked back behind the counter and positioned herself directly between Darius and Amara. Arms spread wide. Palms flat on the stainless steel. A human wall between a father and his daughter. She projected her voice so it reached every corner of the room. I want everyone in this cafeteria to know that I am acting in the interest of student safety. I do not feel safe with this man in our facility. I asked him to leave. He refused. Called security. He refused to cooperate. She was building her case now. Out loud. In real time. Constructing a narrative where she was the victim and Darius was the threat. Because that's what she'd done for 19 years. She'd mastered the art of making cruelty look like protocol. Then she turned to Amara. She locked eyes with her. And her voice didn't get quieter. It got sharper. The way a blade gets sharper when you press it at an angle. And you. She pointed a gloved finger at Amara's chest. Sit down. The adults are handling this now. Amara didn't move. You should be grateful this university even lets you sit in this room at all. Do you hear me? Grateful. Not every school would be this generous with people like you. Grateful. The word hung in the cafeteria like smoke after a gunshot. As if Amara's seat at Whitmore was a gift that could be revoked at any time. As if her presence was charity. As if her perfect grades, her published research, her 1580 SAT score, and her family paying full tuition were all completely meaningless because her skin was the wrong color for the main serving line. Amara didn't sit down. She didn't cry. She stood perfectly still. But something behind her eyes broke. The quiet kind. The kind where a person stops believing the world will ever be fair, no matter how hard they try. No matter how well they behave. No matter how many research papers they publish or how many hours they study. Sophie, Amara's roommate, a white girl with glasses who'd been sitting at a nearby table the entire time, rushed over and grabbed Amara's arm. "This is insane," she whispered. "This is absolutely insane." At a corner table near the faculty entrance, an older man had been watching the entire scene in silence. Dr. Henry Caldwell, 67 years old, gray hair, tweed jacket, wire-rimmed glasses, tenured professor of constitutional law at Whitmore for 23 years. He'd written 4 books on civil rights litigation. He'd argued before the Supreme Court twice. He'd watched this country bend and break, and occasionally live up to its promises for longer than most of the students in this room had been alive. He had watched every moment of the confrontation without saying a single word. But when Patricia said grateful, when she pointed that gloved finger at an 18-year-old girl and told her she should be grateful for the privilege of eating lunch in a building her father was funding with $12.5 million, Dr. Caldwell stood up. He picked up his coffee cup. He walked calmly to the faculty entrance. He pushed through the double doors into the hallway. And he made one phone call. Not to campus security. Not to human resources. Not to the student affairs office. He called Dean Edward Whitmore directly, on his personal cell phone. "Edward, get to the dining hall. Right now." A pause. "No, I'm not going to explain it over the phone. Just get here. And Edward, whatever you do, do not bring a lawyer." He hung up, took a slow sip of coffee, and waited by the elevator. That phone call was about to change the trajectory of Patricia Sullivan's life. But it was also about to change the trajectory of Whitmore University itself. Back in the cafeteria, Darius reached for his phone. He didn't make a scene. He didn't announce what he was doing. He simply pulled the phone from his blazer pocket and sent 2 text messages. Fast. Precise. Each word chosen the way a surgeon chooses an incision. No wasted movement, no room for error. Message 1 to Catherine Brooks, Chief Legal Counsel at Coleman Bioventures. Freeze every contract linked to Whitmore University across our entire portfolio, including the foundation endowment. Effective immediately. Message 2 to Dean Edward Whitmore. Come to the dining hall. Now. He slid the phone back into his pocket. Patricia didn't see the messages. She was too busy straightening her apron and turning to the nearest kitchen worker, a young black woman who had been staring at the floor the entire time, and saying loud enough for every table to hear, "See, that is how you handle them. 19 years. Never failed." The young woman didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the floor. Her hands gripped the edge of her station so hard her knuckles went pale. Officer Hayes gestured for Darius to follow her into the hallway. Standard procedure. Remove the threat from the room while the situation de-escalates. Except everyone in that hallway, and most of the people in that cafeteria, already understood that the real threat was still behind the counter wiping down a station and humming. Hayes walked beside Darius in silence for about 15 steps. Then she stopped. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Coleman, between you and me that was wrong. Everything that happened in there was wrong. I knew it the second I walked in." Darius looked at her. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. The first real emotion he'd shown since walking through the cafeteria door. "How often does she do this?" Hayes stared at the floor tiles. A long pause. The kind of pause that carries the weight of 11 years of watching something happen and telling yourself, it wasn't your place to stop it. "You are not the first person to ask me that." Footsteps behind them. Amara had followed. Tyler Brooks was right beside her, phone still raised, still recording. "Dad." Amara's voice was small. Not the kind of small that has to do with volume. The kind that has everything to do with how much a person has been carrying alone. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it. She swallowed hard. But she does this every week. Not just to me. To Tyler. To every black student who uses the main line. She sends us to Section B every single time. She calls it sorting. Says it's policy. Tyler nodded. There is no policy, sir. I checked. I went to the Student Affairs office in my second week and asked for the dining handbook. There is no Section A. There is no Section B. She made it up. And she's been using it to humiliate every black and brown student who walks through that door. Darius looked at his daughter. His eyes went red for the first time all day. Not from anger. From the specific, suffocating pain a father feels when he discovers his child has been suffering in silence. Not because she was afraid, but because she was trying to protect him from worrying. She'd been absorbing Patricia Sullivan's cruelty every week for 3 months. And she'd done it alone because she didn't want her father, a man who had already lost his brother, his wife and most of his capacity for peace, to carry one more burden. Darius didn't speak. He placed his hand on her shoulder. The same gesture from the cafeteria. But heavier now. Weighted with everything he wished he had known weeks ago. At the end of the hallway the elevator chimed. Steel doors slid open. Dean Edward Whitmore stepped out. Same navy suit from the morning board meeting. Face the color of old paper. Hands shaking from the text he'd read on the ride down. He looked at Darius, the man he had called our most important strategic partner just 3 hours ago, and understood that the ground beneath his career had cracked wide open. Oh my God, he whispered. What happened? Whitmore was already sweating through his dress shirt. He looked at Darius, then at Amara. Then at Tyler, who was still holding up his phone like a shield. Someone tell me what happened. Right now. Hayes spoke first. She kept it short. She kept it factual. A cafeteria supervisor denied a student her meal. The student's father intervened. The supervisor called security, accused the father of trespassing, and physically seized his personal belongings in front of the entire dining hall. The father cooperated fully. The supervisor did not. Whitmore listened. His face got paler with every sentence. Then he turned to Darius. And for the first time since stepping out of that elevator, he actually looked at him. Not at the blazer. Not at the visitor badge clipped to his pocket. At the man. Mr. Coleman, Whitmore said slowly, choosing every word like a man walking through a minefield. I want you to know that whatever happened in that cafeteria does not represent this university. Darius looked at him. Flat. You were in a boardroom with me 3 hours ago. Yes, sir. You shook my hand. Yes. You called me your most important strategic partner. Whitmore nodded barely. You showed me architectural drawings of a building that would carry my dead wife's name. Whitmore's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And while you were pouring me coffee upstairs, your employee was downstairs telling my daughter she should be grateful you let her sit in your cafeteria. The hallway went completely silent. Amara spoke next. Quiet but clear. Every word a nail driven into a coffin. Dean Whitmore, this was not the first time. She does this every week. She has a system. She calls it sorting. Black students go to Section B. White students stay on the main line. There is no policy that says this. She made it up. And nobody stopped her. Whitmore looked like a man watching his house burn down from the inside. I didn't know, he whispered. That is the problem, Darius said. You didn't know. Or you didn't look. He let that sit for 3 full seconds. Research from Harvard's Project Implicit has documented something that explains exactly what happened at Whitmore University for 19 years. Institutional discrimination rarely comes from one bad actor operating in isolation. It survives because of what researchers call the bystander effect at scale. When everyone in a system assumes someone else will speak up, nobody does. The kitchen workers who watched Patricia sort students assumed a supervisor would intervene. The security officers who responded to her calls assumed she was following protocol. The administrators who occasionally heard complaints assumed human resources would handle them. And Patricia Sullivan operated for 19 years, not because she was powerful, but because everyone around her stayed silent. Darius understood this. He'd seen it in systems before. He'd fought it in clinical trial politics, in biotech boardrooms, in FDA approval processes that prioritize comfort over correctness. The pattern was always the same. One person doing harm, 100 people watching, and a system designed to protect the watcher's silence rather than the victim's dignity. That pattern was about to end, at least at Whitmore. "Here is what is going to happen," Darius said. His voice was calm, not the calm of someone holding back anger. The calm of someone who has already decided exactly how this ends and is simply narrating the path to get there. "You and I are going to walk back into that cafeteria together. You are going to address what happened in front of the same students who watched it happen. And your employee is going to be removed from this campus today. Not next week. Not after a review. Today." Whitmore started to protest. "Mr. Coleman, perhaps we should handle this privately. I can schedule a meeting with Human Resources and the legal team and we can." She handled it publicly. Darius's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. "She humiliated my daughter publicly. She called security on me publicly. She searched my belongings publicly in front of 300 students with phones. So no, Dean Whitmore. We are not handling this in a conference room." Whitmore closed his mouth. They walked back. All of them. Darius first. Whitmore half a step behind. Amara and Tyler and Officer Hayes following. The cafeteria was still full. Nobody had left. Every student was either staring at their phone or staring at the door. The room smelled like cold food and nervous energy. Trays sat untouched on tables. Conversations had stopped entirely. Patricia Sullivan was behind the counter. She was wiping down a station. Humming. She looked relaxed. She looked like a woman who believed the problem had been solved and the natural order had been restored. Then the door opened. Whitmore walked in first. The cafeteria went dead silent. 300 students stopped breathing at the same time. Patricia looked up. She saw the dean. She straightened. She started to smile. Then she saw Darius right behind him, walking back into the room she had thrown him out of. The smile didn't just disappear. It collapsed. Layer by layer. Like a building falling in slow motion. Whitmore spoke. His voice shook. But it carried to every corner of that room. "Mrs. Sullivan." Patricia froze. "This is Mr. Darius Coleman. He is a member of our Board of Advisory Trustees. He is the father of Amara Coleman, a student at this university who pays full tuition. He is the founder and CEO of Coleman Bioventures, a $4.2 billion company." Patricia's hand moved toward the counter for support. "His foundation is in the process of funding a $12.5 million endowment for this university. And his company is the leading candidate for the food service contract that currently pays your salary." He paused. Let every word settle into the silence like stones dropping into still water. "You will apologize to Mr. Coleman and to his daughter immediately. And then you will accompany me to my office where you will be suspended pending a formal investigation. Effective right now." Every phone in the cafeteria was up. Every camera was recording. The red lights blinked like dozens of tiny witnesses. Patricia grabbed the edge of the counter. Her knuckles went white. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. If you want to see Patricia's face when she realizes everything she built on 19 years of cruelty is about to collapse, hit subscribe right now. Because the next 5 minutes are going to be the most satisfying takedown you've ever witnessed. And what the investigation uncovers after this. It's bigger than one cafeteria. Much bigger. Patricia finally found her voice. It came out cracked and tangled, like something dragged out of a drain after years of clogging. "Mr. Coleman. I had no idea who you were. If I had known, I never would have." Darius cut her off. Not with volume. With precision. That is the entire problem. He took one step forward. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just close enough that his words didn't have to travel far. "You should not have to know who I am to treat my daughter like a human being." Patricia's mouth opened again. Nothing came out. "You should not have to Google someone before you decide whether they deserve a hot meal. You should not have to check their bank account before you decide whether they belong in a serving line. You should not need a title or a net worth or a board seat to treat a child with dignity. A teacher sitting 3 tables away covered her mouth with both hands. 2 students in the back started clapping, then stopped, unsure if it was appropriate, then started again. Patricia tried one more time. Tears now. Real or performed? Impossible to tell. 19 years of practice had blurred the line between genuine emotion and strategic performance so thoroughly that even she probably couldn't tell the difference anymore. I was just doing my job. I have been here 19 years. Ask anyone. I care about these students. I care about all of them. That's when Amara stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She spoke the way a person speaks when they have been holding something inside for months and have finally decided to set it down. There is no policy that separates students by line, Mrs. Sullivan. Patricia turned to face her. For the first time all day, the cafeteria manager looked uncertain. Not apologetic. Not remorseful. Just uncertain. The way a chess player looks when they realize they've been outmaneuvered, and the board is already set for checkmate. I checked, Amara continued. Her voice didn't waver. I went to the student affairs office in my second week and asked for the dining handbook. I read it cover to cover. There is no Section A. There is no Section B. There is no policy that assigns students to different serving lines based on anything. Not race, not financial status, not meal plan type. She paused. Let the room absorb it. You made it up. And you used it to humiliate every black and brown student who walked through that door. The cafeteria erupted. Not in applause. In sound. Gasps. Whispers. Murmurs that rippled through the room like waves. A few students said yes out loud. The involuntary affirmation of people hearing their own experience spoken into the open for the first time. One girl at a corner table was crying. Not loudly. Quietly. The way you cry when something you've been carrying alone suddenly has a name. Tyler Brooks held his phone higher, making sure every word was captured. The camera didn't shake anymore. His hands were steady now. He'd been waiting for this moment since his second week on campus, the moment someone finally said out loud what everyone had been too afraid to say. Patricia looked around the room for an ally. She looked at the kitchen staff. 5 workers. 3 black. 2 Latino. They had worked under her for years. They had watched her sort students. They had heard her comments. They had said nothing because she controlled their schedules, their shifts, their evaluations, their livelihoods. Not one of them looked at her as she scanned their faces. She looked at Officer Hayes. Hayes looked away. She looked at Dean Whitmore. Whitmore was already reading from a piece of paper he had pulled from his jacket pocket. Official letterhead, pre-drafted language, the kind of document that exists because institutions always prepare for the day their secrets come to light. Mrs. Sullivan, Whitmore said, his voice steadier now, as if reading something official gave him a spine he did not normally possess. You are hereby suspended from your position as Director of Dining Services, effective immediately with pay, pending a full investigation into your conduct. You are to leave this campus within the hour. Officer Hayes will escort you. Patricia's mouth moved, but no words came out. She untied her apron with shaking hands, folded it carefully, placed it on the counter the way a person folds a flag at a funeral, with the slow, deliberate movements of someone performing a ritual they never imagined they'd be performing. Then she walked toward the side exit. She passed the kitchen staff on her way out. 5 workers. People she'd managed for years. People she'd mentored and trained and protected. Not one of them looked at her as she passed. Not one of them said goodbye. As Hayes walked Patricia through the side door, one student, a white boy in a baseball cap sitting near the exit, said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. 19 years too long. The door closed behind her. Then something shifted in the room. The tension didn't disappear. It changed shape. It went from anger to something softer. Something that needed repair. Darius walked behind the serving counter. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned him. The 2 remaining kitchen workers stepped aside without being asked, not out of fear, but out of something closer to respect. They just watched a man stand in front of 300 people and defend his daughter's dignity without raising his voice once. He picked up a clean tray, moved down the line, placed items on it himself. Grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables, a carton of chocolate milk, because that's what Amara always chose even at 18, even with a published research paper and a 1580 SAT score. Some things don't change. He carried the tray to where Amara was standing and set it down in front of her. "Eat your lunch, sweetheart." His voice was soft, fatherly, the same voice he used when she was 5 and scared of thunderstorms, the same voice he used when she was 12 and struggling with her first algebra test, the same voice he used when she was 16 and whispering, "I got you, Daddy," at her mother's funeral. "You earned your seat here." Every single day. Amara looked at the tray, then at her father. Then she sat down, and she ate. Darius turned to face the cafeteria. 300 students. Dozens of phones. Total silence. If anyone in this room has ever been made to feel the way my daughter was made to feel today, I want you to hear me. His voice carried without effort. Not loud. Not performative. Just true. It was never your fault. It was never about you. And it will not happen here again. I am going to make sure of that. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then one person clapped. Then 5. Then 20. Then the whole cafeteria was on its feet. The applause wasn't polished. It was rough and uneven and full of something that had been held back for a very long time. Students who had been sorted into Section B for months, who had swallowed their anger and told themselves it wasn't worth fighting, stood up and clapped until their hands hurt. Kitchen workers stepped out from behind the counter and joined them. Even Officer Hayes, still standing by the side door, nodded slowly and pressed her hand to her chest in a gesture that said, "I see you. I should have done more. I'm sorry." Amara looked up at her father through the noise, and for the first time that day she smiled. That afternoon, Catherine Brooks landed on campus like a storm in a tailored suit. Darius had called her from the hallway at 12:45 p.m. By 2 p.m., she was standing in the dean's office with a forensic data team, a subpoena, and the kind of calm expression that made lawyers on the other side of the table start sweating before she even opened her mouth. Catherine didn't ask for permission. She presented the subpoena and her team went to work. They pulled the cafeteria surveillance footage, 4 cameras, audio-enabled, 120 days of archived recordings. They pulled Patricia Sullivan's full personnel file. Every evaluation, every commendation, every complaint. They pulled every formal complaint filed by a student or parent of color in the past 8 years. And they pulled the meal plan database, every transaction, every modification, every override going back 3 full years. What they found made even Darius go quiet. In 8 years, 14 Black and Latino students and parents had filed formal complaints about Patricia Sullivan's conduct in the dining hall. 14. 11 of those complaints had been buried by the previous administration. Filed. Stamped. Forgotten. 3 families had never even received a response. 5 students had transferred out of Whitmore entirely. Their exit interviews all cited the same reason: hostile dining conditions. Nobody had followed up. Nobody had asked why. Nobody had connected the dots between 5 separate departures and the woman running the cafeteria. But the meal plan data was worse. Patricia had been manually overriding the system. 23 Black and Latino students had their meal plans downgraded over the past 3 years. Full tuition. Full meal plan. Paid in full by their families, but flagged in the system as scholarship or financial aid recipients. Not a single white student had been reclassified. Not one. The pattern was so clean it looked like official policy. But there was no policy. There never had been. Patricia Sullivan had built an entire system of segregation inside a college cafeteria. And she had done it one keystroke at a time. Amara's card had been flagged on her 3rd day at Whitmore. A 2021 study from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission found something that explains why Patricia operated undetected for so long. 75% of workplace discrimination complaints are never formally resolved. Most are buried, ignored, or quietly dismissed by institutions that find it easier to protect the status quo than to confront the people who enforce it. The pattern at Whitmore wasn't unusual. It was typical. What was unusual was that someone with the resources, the legal team, and the sheer stubborn refusal to look away had finally walked through the door. That evening, Tyler Brooks uploaded his 11-minute video to social media. He didn't add a caption. He didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. A cafeteria manager snatching a tray from a black girl's hands, calling her a rat, telling her she should be grateful. A father standing calm while his belongings were dumped on a counter. A dean announcing that the man everyone had just treated like a trespasser was actually a $4.2 billion CEO. The video didn't need commentary. It was its own commentary. Within 12 hours it had 6 million views. Within 48 hours 22 million. The hashtag #WhitmoreShame was trending in every state in the country. And Patricia Sullivan, sitting in her apartment 19 miles from campus, watching her life collapse in real time on a phone screen, finally understood something she should have understood 19 years ago. You don't get to decide who deserves dignity. Dignity isn't yours to grant or withhold. It belongs to every person who walks through your door, regardless of what they look like, regardless of who their parents are, regardless of whether you know their name or their net worth or their story. And when you forget that, when you build a career on the assumption that some people deserve less of it than others, the reckoning doesn't come quietly. It comes with cameras. It comes with subpoenas. It comes with 22 million people watching you unravel in 11-minute increments. It comes with a father who loved his daughter enough to walk through a door he wasn't supposed to walk through and ask a question nobody wanted him to ask. And it comes with an 18-year-old girl who sat down and ate her lunch while 300 people watched, because her father told her she'd earned her seat. Every single day. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, if you've ever watched someone be treated like they didn't belong and you weren't sure what to do, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because the next Patricia is already out there. And the next Darius might be watching right now. But we're not done. Because 12 more families are about to come forward. And what happens in a courtroom 3 months from now will make sure Patricia Sullivan never works near a student again. Marissa Taylor was sitting in her living room in Hartford, Connecticut, scrolling through her phone at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night. Her kids were asleep. Her husband was watching a basketball game with the volume turned low. The house was quiet in the way houses get when everyone else has stopped needing things from you, and you finally get a few minutes to yourself. She saw the video on her timeline. First, she almost scrolled past. There were so many videos like this now, too many. Every week, another clip of someone being mistreated in a public space. Every week, another comment section full of people arguing about who was right and who was wrong and whether it was really about race or whether the person filming was just looking for attention. But then she saw the cafeteria uniform and the gloved finger pointing at a black girl's chest. And she felt her stomach drop, the way it drops when you see something you recognize from a nightmare you thought you'd woken up from. Because she had seen that finger before. 2 years earlier, Marissa's son Isaiah had been a sophomore at Whitmore University. He was studying environmental science. He made the dean's list his first year. He played intramural basketball on Thursday nights and called his mother every Sunday without fail. One afternoon in November, Isaiah went to the cafeteria for lunch. He swiped his meal card. The machine beeped. A red light. Patricia Sullivan came around the counter and accused him of stealing the card. She said it loud enough for the entire serving line to hear. She said, "You people think you can just take whatever you want and nobody notices." She called security. She had him escorted out of the dining hall in front of 40 students. She filed a formal report that went into his permanent student record. Isaiah hadn't stolen anything. The card was his. It had his name on it. His photo. His student ID number. Patricia hadn't checked the system. She hadn't asked to see his ID. She hadn't done any of the things a reasonable person would do before accusing a student of theft in front of a room full of witnesses. She just saw a black boy in her cafeteria and decided he didn't belong. Isaiah stopped eating in the dining hall after that. He bought groceries and cooked in his dorm room. He lost 15 pounds in 2 months because he was skipping meals between classes and didn't have time to cook every day. He stopped going to campus events. He stopped studying in the library because the library was next to the dining hall, and he couldn't walk past that door without feeling his chest tighten. He transferred at the end of the semester. He told his mother it was because he wanted a different program. He never told her about Patricia Sullivan. Not the full story. Not until 2 years later, when Marissa saw that video on her phone and asked him point blank, with tears already forming in her eyes. "Did that woman do something to you too?" Isaiah sat on the couch next to his mother and told her everything. Marissa called Catherine Brooks the next morning. Within a week, 6 more families came forward. Within 2 weeks, 12. Every single one of them had the same story. A Black or Latino student eating in the dining hall. Patricia Sullivan approaching them. An accusation, a humiliation, a public spectacle. Sometimes it was about meal cards. Sometimes it was about sitting in the wrong section. Sometimes it was about nothing at all. Just Patricia's need to remind certain students that she controlled the space they were trying to exist in. The Renee Coleman Foundation funded every single family's legal representation. Darius made one statement to the press. Just one. "This is not about my daughter. This is about every student who was ever made to feel small in a room where they belonged." Jonathan Davis, an investigative reporter at the Hartford Tribune, published a 3-part series titled The Sorting Line. He spent 6 weeks digging through records, interviewing former students, filing FOIA requests for internal university documents that Whitmore's administration tried very hard to keep buried. The series documented 19 years of complaints, cover-ups, and institutional silence. It named administrators who had received formal complaints and done nothing. It quoted exit interviews from students who had transferred because of Patricia's behavior. It included emails from human resources staff who had recommended investigations that were never authorized. National outlets picked it up within hours. Cable news ran the cafeteria footage on a loop. Editorial boards from New York to Los Angeles called for systemic reform in university dining services across the country. Whitmore University's enrollment applications for the following year dropped 22% in 2 weeks. Donors pulled pledges. Not all of them, but enough. 3 major alumni donors, people who had given millions over decades, sent letters to the Board of Trustees saying they would not contribute another dollar until the university demonstrated that it had addressed the culture that allowed Patricia Sullivan to operate for 19 years. The Alumni Association wrote an open letter. The student government passed a unanimous vote of no confidence in the administration. Dean Edward Whitmore resigned within a month. He didn't give a press conference. He didn't call a meeting. He sent a 1-paragraph email to the faculty listserv at 11:03 p.m. on a Sunday night and was gone by Monday morning. The paragraph said, in essence, that he accepted responsibility for the institutional failures that had occurred under his leadership, and that he believed the university needed new leadership to rebuild trust with its students and community. It was the kind of resignation that sounds noble on paper, but feels hollow to anyone who understands that the real failure wasn't that Dean Whitmore didn't know what Patricia was doing. The real failure was that the system was designed so that he never had to know. The Board of Trustees appointed an interim leader. Dr. Yvonne Wilson, a Black educator with 30 years of experience in higher education equity, took over the following week. Her first act was commissioning a full external audit of every department on campus. Not just dining services. Every department, every office, every corner of the university where a student might have experienced discrimination and had no one to turn to. Her second act was walking through the dining hall at lunch, shaking hands with students, and eating a tray of grilled chicken at a table near the window. She didn't make a speech. She didn't call the press. She just showed up and ate lunch in the same room where Patricia Sullivan had told a young woman she should be grateful for the privilege of existing. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The Connecticut Attorney General opened a formal civil rights investigation. Patricia Sullivan was charged with assault for physically seizing Darius Coleman's briefcase. She was charged with unlawful restraint for blocking Amara's access to the meal line and physically positioning herself between a student and the food she had paid for. And the charges carried a hate crime enhancement based on the documented 8-year pattern of racially targeted conduct found in the surveillance archives and the meal plan database. The civil suit filed on behalf of 12 families was settled for $15.8 million from the university's insurance carrier. A separate judgment of $920,000 was entered against Patricia Sullivan personally, but the criminal trial was what everyone was waiting for. On the day of the trial, Judge Eleanor Anderson presided. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters lined the back wall. Tyler Brooks sat in the second row with his phone in his lap, Not recording this time, just watching. Patricia took the stand. She wore a gray blouse and a blazer that didn't quite fit. Her hair was pulled back. She looked smaller than she had in the cafeteria. Diminished. The kind of diminished that happens when a person who spent 19 years wielding power over others finally has to answer to someone with more power than they ever had. Her lawyer asked her to explain her actions. Patricia said she didn't see color. She said she only saw behavior. She said she had been misunderstood. She said that in 19 years, she had never intended to harm anyone. She said she cared about all the students equally. The prosecution played 19 audio clips from the cafeteria surveillance recordings. 8 years of Patricia Sullivan's voice caught on camera saying the same things to different faces. The same sorting instructions. The same sneering tone. The same gloved finger pointing at the same kind of student. The same phrases, Section B, people like you should be grateful. Repeated so many times across so many recordings that by the 10th clip, people in the gallery were mouthing the words along with her. The jury watched Tyler Brooks's video in full. 11 minutes. Every frame. From the moment Patricia snatched the tray to the moment Darius served his daughter lunch. Nobody in the courtroom moved. The verdict came back in under 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, 36 months in state custody, suspended to 24 months of supervised probation given her age, mandatory completion of a civil rights education program, a permanent ban from working in any position involving students or minors, full restitution to all affected families. Judge Anderson spoke directly to Patricia before closing the case. What you did was not enforcement of any policy. It was cruelty, systematic, deliberate, and protected by the silence of an institution that chose comfort over justice. That silence ends today. In the gallery, Marissa Taylor sat with her son Isaiah beside her. She didn't clap when the verdict was read. She just held her son's hand and said quietly, so quietly that only he could hear, 19 years too late. Research from the American Psychological Association shows that systemic discrimination doesn't just harm individuals. It creates what researchers call institutional trauma that affects entire communities for generations. Students who witnessed Patricia's behavior, even if they weren't directly targeted, internalized the message that their presence was conditional, that they could be removed at any time, that the institution would not protect them. The 12 families who came forward weren't just seeking justice for themselves. They were breaking a cycle that would have continued for another 19 years if Darius Coleman hadn't walked through that cafeteria door on a Tuesday morning in October. Institutional trauma doesn't heal with the verdict. It doesn't heal with a settlement. It heals with sustained visible change, the kind that tells every student who walks through that door that they belong, that they are safe, and that no one will ever again have the power to make them feel otherwise. But the real work was just beginning. Because a verdict can punish a person. A settlement can compensate victims. But neither one can rebuild a culture. That takes something slower. Something quieter. Something that happens one Friday at a time, in a cafeteria that looks completely different from the one Darius walked into on that Tuesday morning. 6 months later, the cafeteria looked like a different place. Not because the walls had been repainted or the tables replaced. The linoleum was the same. The fluorescent lights still buzzed in that familiar way that every institutional dining hall in America shares. The ice machine still hummed 3 rooms away. But everything else had changed. New posters lined the walls. Student artwork, paintings, photographs, digital prints, submitted by students from every culture represented on campus. A Somali student's photograph of her grandmother's kitchen in Mogadishu hung next to a watercolor of a Korean market painted by a first-generation junior from Bridgeport. A black student's portrait series called Faces of Whitmore covered the entire north wall. 60 faces, 60 stories, 60 reminders that this room belonged to all of them. A banner near the entrance, hand-painted by the Student Art Collective, read in bold blue letters, "Every seat belongs to everyone." The kitchen had a completely new team. A new director of dining services named Sofia Moreno had been hired from outside the university. She came from a community college in New Haven where she'd spent 8 years building a dining program that prioritized cultural diversity in its menu and student dignity in its service. Sofia learned every student worker's name in her first week. All 23 of them. She asked them what they were studying. She asked them where they were from. She asked them what their favorite meal was and then put it on the rotating menu. She started a tradition called Family Friday. Once a month, on the first Friday, parents and family members were invited to eat lunch alongside their kids in the dining hall. No reservation required. No visitor badge needed. No sign-in at a front desk. You just walked in, picked up a tray, and stood in line like everyone else. It was Sophia's idea. But the inspiration came from Amara Coleman, who had told Sophia during their first meeting, "My dad showed up on a random Tuesday and ate lunch with me. It was the best meal I'd had all semester. Not because of the food. Because he was there." Whitmore University had a new Office of Equity and Inclusion, staffed by 3 full-time professionals instead of the 1 part-time administrator who had existed before. Mandatory bias training was now required for every employee on campus, from the president's office to the groundskeeping crew. Not the checkbox kind of training that people sit through with their arms crossed and their eyes glazed over. Real training. Scenario-based. Facilitated by people who understood that bias doesn't disappear because you watched a 45-minute video. Dear Yvonne Wilson, confirmed as permanent vice president of student affairs, had personally rewritten the staff conduct handbook from cover to cover. She removed every clause that gave individual supervisors unchecked authority over student access to campus services. She added a student oversight committee with the power to review complaints and recommend disciplinary action. She made sure that no single employee would ever again have the power to decide who belonged and who didn't. Amara co-founded a student program called Open Table. The concept was simple. Incoming freshmen, especially students of color and first-generation students, were paired with upperclassmen mentors who helped them navigate everything from dining hall logistics to how to file a formal complaint when something went wrong. The mentors weren't just guides. They were witnesses. People who would stand with you in a room where you felt alone and make sure your voice was heard. The program had 62 mentors by the end of its first semester. Every single one of them had a story about a time they'd been made to feel like they didn't belong. Every single one of them had decided to make sure no one else would feel that way on their watch. The Renee Coleman Foundation finalized its endowment on new terms. $18 million. Up from the original $12.5. Darius had increased the commitment after the investigation revealed the full scope of what had been happening at Whitmore for 19 years. Not as punishment. As investment. As a statement that the foundation was doubling down on this community precisely because it had been failed. 50 full tuition scholarships for students of color from the Hartford and Bridgeport public school systems. Permanent. Renewable. Named the Renee Coleman Belonging Scholarship. Not the Renee Coleman Excellence Scholarship. Not the Renee Coleman Merit Scholarship. The Belonging Scholarship. Because Amara had told her father, the night they sat at the kitchen table drafting the terms, "Dad, they already know we're excellent. We've been proving that our whole lives. What they need to know is that we belong here. Without having to prove it." Darius had looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he'd picked up his pen and changed the name. Isaiah Taylor, Marissa's son. The young man who had lost 15 pounds and transferred out of Whitmore 2 years earlier because Patricia Sullivan accused him of stealing his own meal card. Reapplied to the university. He was accepted. On his first day back on campus, Amara met him at the front door of the dining hall. She was holding a buddy badge, the kind Open Table mentors wore, and she'd already set a tray at a table by the window. The good table. The one with the most sunlight. "Welcome back," she said. Isaiah looked at the door. The same door he'd been escorted through 2 years ago by a campus security officer while 40 students watched. The same door he'd sworn he'd never walk through again. He walked through it. And this time nobody stopped him. This time, a young woman with her mother's name on a scholarship and her father's quiet strength walked beside him and made sure he got his lunch in peace. Tyler Brooks became president of the Black Student Union. His 11-minute video had been viewed over 40 million times. Major news outlets had asked to license it. Documentarians had asked to use it in films. A civil rights museum in Atlanta had asked to include it in a permanent exhibit. He never took it down. He kept it on his page with no caption, no commentary, no monetization. Just the raw footage of what happened on a Tuesday morning in October, when a cafeteria manager called a young woman a rat, and a father walked through a door and refused to look away. When people asked him why he didn't add a caption or a statement or a call to action, Tyler said the same thing every time. The video says everything that needs to be said. On a Friday afternoon in October, exactly 1 year after the incident, Darius Coleman stood at the back of the cafeteria. Same room, same linoleum floor, same fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But the noise was different. The energy was different. The faces behind the counter were different. Students moved through the serving line without hesitation. No one was sorted. No one was redirected. No one was told they were in the wrong place. They picked up trays, they got their food, they sat wherever they wanted. Amara sat at the table in the middle of the room, surrounded by friends. All colors. All backgrounds. They were arguing about a biochemistry assignment, something about enzyme kinetics and competitive inhibitors, and laughing so hard that one of them knocked over a carton of orange juice. Amara grabbed a napkin and cleaned it up without missing a beat. Darius watched from the back. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. This was what he'd built all of this for. Not the company. Not the endowment. Not the scholarship. This. A room where his daughter could knock over orange juice and laugh about it, without anyone making her feel like she didn't deserve to be there. Sophia Moreno walked over to him, wiping her hands on her apron. Not in disgust, not in performance, just because she'd been cooking and her hands were wet. Mr. Coleman, would you like to join the line for Family Friday? We have grilled chicken today. Darius smiled. He picked up a tray. He stood in line like every other parent. He served himself grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables, a carton of chocolate milk, and he carried his tray to the table where his daughter was sitting. Amara looked up, smiled, pulled out a chair. He sat down. He could have done 100 things differently. He could have written the check and walked away. He could have pulled Amara out of Whitmore and sent her to a school where she wouldn't have to deal with people like Patricia Sullivan. He could have let the lawyers handle everything from a distance, from a conference room, from the comfortable detachment of legal proceedings and financial leverage. Instead, he kept showing up. Week after week. Friday after Friday. Not because anyone asked him to. Not because it was good for the company's image. Not because there was a camera rolling or a reporter watching. He showed up because showing up is what changes a place. Not money. Not power. Not headlines. Not even justice in the legal sense. Those things matter. They create the conditions for change. But the change itself, the slow, unglamorous day-by-day transformation of a culture from one that tolerates cruelty to one that refuses it, that happens because people keep showing up in rooms where they're needed. In 1960, four Black college students walked into a Woolworth's department store in Greensboro, North Carolina. They sat down at a whites-only lunch counter and asked to be served. They were refused. They came back the next day. And the next. And the next. Within weeks, sit-ins had spread to 55 cities across 13 states. Within 6 months, the Greensboro Woolworths desegregated its lunch counter. Those 4 students didn't have a $4.2 billion company. They didn't have a legal team or a forensic data audit or a foundation with $18 million in endowments. They had a tray, a counter, and the refusal to leave a room they had every right to be in. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit down, stay put, and refuse to let someone else's cruelty define your worth. Darius Coleman knew that story. His mother had told it to him at the kitchen table in East Baltimore when he was 9 years old and grieving his brother. She told him that change doesn't come from the people who have the most power. It comes from the people who refuse to accept that the way things are is the way they have to be. He carried that story with him into the Marine Corps, into MIT, into a garage lab in Stanford, into a boardroom on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore Administration Building. And on a Tuesday morning in October, he'd carried it into a cafeteria where his daughter was being called a rat. Dignity is not something a student should have to earn by having the right parents or the right bank account or the right last name. The Patricias of this world don't survive because they're powerful. They survive because everyone around them stays silent. The teachers who look away. The security officers who follow orders without asking questions. The administrators who bury complaints because fixing them is inconvenient. The coworkers who hear the things being said and tell themselves it's not their fight. When just one person refuses to stay quiet, the whole system falls apart. You don't need a $4 billion company to stop a Patricia. You need a phone, a witness, and the willingness to say that is not okay loud and clear in the room where it happened. So here's my question for you. If you walked into that cafeteria as a stranger, no connection to Darius, no connection to Amara, no stake in the outcome, and you heard what Darius heard, what would you do? Would you speak up? Would you step forward? Would you pull out your phone and start recording? Or would you tell yourself it wasn't your business? Would you look at your tray and eat your lunch and pretend you didn't hear what you heard? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit you somewhere real, if it reminded you of a time someone made you feel small, or a time you watched someone else get made to feel small and you didn't know what to do, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Someone who's been made to feel like they don't belong in a room they earned their place in. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because the next Patricia is already out there. Somewhere. In some cafeteria, some office, some classroom, making someone feel small. The only question is, who's going to be standing in the doorway? Kindness isn't a luxury reward for people with money or status, or the right last name. You shouldn't have to Google someone before deciding whether they deserve basic human respect. Just be kind. It's literally free. And it costs you nothing. But the cost of not being kind? That cost is measured in 15-pound weight losses, in transfer letters, in exit interviews that nobody reads, in 19 years of silence that could have been broken by one person who chose to speak up. Choose to speak up. Choose to show up. Choose to sit down at the counter and stay. Thanks for watching.